For the first review of this episode, we have our first V16 track. Very cool to start off a new era of this wonderful game. Anyways, this is Amsterdam Gardens, a V16 remake of one of Mr. James's older tracks. Now, I played said older track, and I gotta say, there's only a slight resemblance in the decoration. Otherwise, this is an entirely new track. Now, for a V16 track, it's a little hard to judge difficulty, since it uses the new gameplay mechanics, but I do think this is on the easy side for sure. The off-road section is very linear, and the paraglider is quite short and simple. This is a piece of cake to complete in my opinion. I do find this quite fun, but there are some things I would like to point out. The start does seem to have some slight RNG to it, randomly being down 0.004 seconds with no input difference. If anything, I would argue this is because of the transition to the off-road wheels. The fact the player is on the ground during the change may have some effects on the way you pop up, so I would personally lean more towards changing the off-road wheels during airtime to prevent any weirdness. Additionally, as I always point out, because I'm definitely not impatient, the start has so much AFK time. I'd really rather not sit there for 8 seconds every time before touching anything, and of course, in a multiplayer lobby where you'll be resetting often, those 8 seconds add up. But the start of the off-road section I actually enjoy quite a bit. I think it's nicely tuned for the new grip, and pretty fun to optimize. This little cut through the trees is very nicely marked with the path piece, and should be visible to any player driving past here. But the tube section does leave a bit to be desired. Tube transitions between pieces are very finicky, as you'll find they will sometimes not line up smoothly. This can be counteracted with a bit of fiddling using scaling, but most players won't know that and just have to deal with these bumpy piece transitions. Along with that though, I do generally prefer tubes to use alternating paints so the player can see a bit easier. Enclosed tubes are constantly in shadow, and using the same paint all the way through can make it quite difficult to read the curves and turns. It ends up being more memory dependent than you might think, especially on a paint as dark as this one. Moving on, I think the transition to the paraglider is really cute and very effective, but the section is very simple. Just fly through the checkpoint and turn to the finish. Surprisingly, or not if you know the paragliders already, there is a bit to optimize here. I think it's funny and cruel that the fast line takes you straight through this windmill. Intentional or not, it makes for a lighthearted obstacle sure to frustrate some people. But overall, I do genuinely like this track. The deco is quite basic, but I think it works effectively, and complements the innocent feeling I get when driving it. Maybe a little too many tulips for my taste though. One extra note though, is I am entirely not used to the paraglider or the off-road wheels yet, as with most of the player base, so I think it's safe to say we don't fully know what a good level would look like with these gameplay mechanics. Just something to keep in mind with V16 tracks, it may just be fun because it's new and different.
Next up we have Alley Cat, an older map in the bunch, having been made for the racetrack CSL theme a few months ago. The theme was to make a level where the finish was in close proximity to the start, creating a circuit-like track. But to start off, let me just express my disappointment that the mapper name was not icRS. Anyways, the map is very unique. It uses a lot of unusual transitions, which may feel unintuitive at first, but there's indeed a smooth line all the way through. One that can feel quite satisfying to pull off. This map does indeed pass the St. Nick sign test, and given how unique some of the transitions are, the signs are greatly appreciated. Notably the very first jump, the uphill after CP3, and the big jump across the water. That being said, there's one sign I have a problem with, the second sign in the map. Given where you first see it, you'd instinctively want to drive towards it. Except that's actually not the intended route. You want to be on the left here, not jumping down. Something like this would be a possible solution to keep the player on the left, while still pointing them in the right direction. And this is a good point to make that just placing signs can sometimes not be enough. Taking into account when the player sees it will give you a better idea of how it will be read. But moving on, the deco is simple but effective, a staple of St. Nick's decorating abilities at this point. At only just barely over 1,000 objects, there really isn't any points that feel empty while driving. It's all very cohesive. Back to gameplay, the route feels great to drive when you get it right, and there is a lot of room to optimize. But that optimization can actually make it more difficult to finish if you're aiming for a clean run. There's certainly a few turns I need to relearn every time I come back to this track. Furthermore, the big jump over the water is not unlike a hold your breath moment. Getting a clean landing on it is quite precise, considering that underjumping or overjumping can practically kill your run right before the end. And finally, the CP5 turn has a fan that you need to get into as early as possible, the wall next to it being your punishment for not being precise. A possible way to avoid this would be putting a reverse fan under the hill that reaches out to the CP. That way, the wall isn't a nuisance, and you shouldn't need to worry about getting in early anymore. Overall, it's a fun track with a lot of tricky optimizations to make, but its uniqueness definitely makes it stand out among other tracks, while still looking and feeling simple. But before we go, I just can't end this review without pointing out the genius that is using the @ sign for this bench, as well as the teapots for doorknobs. Just so smart, honestly.
Up next, we have Glacial Cavity, another V16 track, as most tracks from this point onwards will be. This is an off-grid track by the looks of it, and making use of the new transitional pieces, this gets a little tough. Besides that, I do think this looks great visually. The patchwork of different blue paints works great to fill out the space, and the main attraction, the light casting down, is just very pretty when viewed at certain points. One thing I will talk about is despite V16 adding manual camera changes for the player, I do think adding forced camera switches is still a thing mappers should do. In this case here, quite a few of these transitions would benefit greatly from first person, and I think it was very much needed for this level. But onto some more specific points. The first transition in the map, I am really not a fan of. Yes, when you start, you can see it, but actually driving the transition is a different story. Neither first person or third person helps here. This is just a case of the road disappearing out from underneath you as you desperately try to stay on. I think I only got this without airtime like 2 times out of the possible 100 attempts I threw at this, as the trick to not getting air in the first piece causes you to have airtime on the piece after, turning this into an essentially blind jump. You can't see where you're going to land, or even where you might start drifting into the air either, for that matter. But moving on, the next area I have a problem with is the ice tube. It's very blind coming into it in third person, and most of the time you end up getting whipped around unnaturally, getting a bad exit to the paraglider. All around, I just don't enjoy this section. I never once could actually get it clean. Another area is the paraglider section itself. The arrows are obvious, yes, but what is not as obvious is where the track actually continues. All you can really see is the slight bit of road on top of this icicle. Signs and directionality in paraglider sections will just be essential going forward, since all the possible directions to go are nearly infinite. And as well as that, the state reset is a little awkward. I think it comes a bit too late, as if your wheels aren't flush with the ground, the little bit of airtime after detach can bounce you awkwardly off course. Finally, though, the ending is mean. Coming into it with speed, I'm fairly certain it was designed to be punishing, because the amount of times I fell off this last turn, never again. Also, I didn't want to waste too much time trying it, but I think there's definitely some shenanigans to be had with this last checkpoint. Hey, so I'm recording this as I'm editing, and I managed to actually find a cut. If you go through the last checkpoint with the paraglider and then loop back around to the reset gate, you can actually just go straight to the finish and save a good chunk of time. I would be afraid of this being a normal occurrence in future levels, so I want to make a PSA that you should really check for alternate routes, especially with the paraglider. The freedom to be able to fly anywhere around the track opens up so many possibilities for unintended cuts, so just be careful. But before we wrap up, there were some hidden collectibles to find. The red gift is quite obvious, just on top of this bit of track. And I'll be honest, I'm not even sure how I managed to find this blue feather. I think that's it, but there is also this random booster, and of course the wizard up top casting the water down in the first place. Normal stuff. Overall, this track ended up being much tougher than I expected. It's quite a challenge, so much so that I just gave up trying to get a clean run. Just finishing with an okay run was good enough for me. It's definitely unique, but I think shows a lot of examples on how just throwing the brand new pieces together doesn't always make for the best experience. The new road pieces and gameplay mechanics are going to be unintuitive for a while, so maybe keep that in mind. Celestial Glade is our next review, another map by Rehomes92, also known as Cyberpunk Ninja, an avid submitter in the series. This level looks great. I believe this blue atmosphere is made with a scaled light, but thankfully it doesn't overpower everything when driving. The ability to have custom-ish skyboxes like this in V16 is pretty neat. and I can see it being used quite a lot going forward. The decoration is also very nicely made. I love this style, the semi-realism of stone and wooden supports with the city-like decorations. It all just works very well together. And the track is smooth, very smooth in fact. It's probably my new favorite from this creator. To me, this is a great use of the new pieces. They don't feel out of place or unintuitive, and they mesh perfectly with the pre-V16 pieces we're all accustomed to. There is one thing to point out though, and that is the arms up sign. I guess if you're slow enough, you may need arms up, but even without arms up, you can overshoot this landing by a fair amount. I think braking may even be beneficial for a smoother down ramp. Nonetheless, this is just an issue that stems from not being as skilled as other players, which is fine, but it's usually the problem with jumps in maps. Not knowing how fast players can actually go and unintentionally punishing them by overjumping. Boosters are a possible way around this, giving the player speed no matter what skill level they are at, but you can also just elongate your landing ramps if you are unsure and give a bit of breathing room for the player's skill gap. One very tiny thing I'll add is on the last turn, if you're staying really close on the inner line, and you should be if you're trying to go fast, you can clip your wheel on this little metal bit. I would definitely recommend against adding stuff like this on the inner lines, as usually inner lines are the fast route, and you're essentially adding an obstacle to your track by doing this. But I think that's it. Overall, I really like this track. It's fun and smooth with some really nice decoration to accompany it. The overjumping is a slight issue for faster players, but it's not super bad, and it's the only part of the level that has that problem. Oh, and these stars are raining down? Very cool.
Next on the list is Swoopy Hills by Linzi. At first glance, this is a very simple map built shortly after the V16 update was released, utilizing some of the newly introduced transitions and blocks. It is a fairly short map, so I don't have a lot of notes on me for this one, but let's start with the good ones first. It's a very short and flowy map that is fun to min-max and optimize. It also kind of reminds me of a Kern Cop style map. Sight reading and visibility is pretty good, but there is a hill at the start and the middle specifically where you catch some air and the landing is right in the middle of a turn, which may cause some people to be caught off guard. So there's no more specifically good notes. Nope, not at all. So let's see some other ones, possibly the bad ones. A very simple map with very simple decoration, which definitely feels a little bit lackluster. Mainly consisting of a couple old-style houses, which has holes in them by the way, and some hills with a mixture of trees. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, it's just unimpressive. Okay, the next one I didn't want to put it as a bad note, but I know Lemmy did it on purpose. There is an inverted control gate at the very end of the track, before the last turn, which is very sneaky and mean. How could you do this to me, Lemmy? I can't believe this. Okay, I have some extra notes to talk about. There's an AFK, it's a little inconsistent, but it exists, so I guess that checks out. The track itself is a little uneventful, meaning there's a lot of sections where you are just driving in a straight line. This is not a bad thing either, just an extra note I thought I would mention. You can warride the first U-turn that loses you time, but saves you enough speed that it will snowball into improvement. That's about it what I can say about this. There's really not much I can say. It's just a very simple and flowy V16 early map. Wah!
Okay, so Wyrm Alpha may just be the coolest level I've seen in a while. DeeDee, you've outdone yourself here with the decoration. I'm not entirely sure if this is based off something from a video game, simply searching the title didn't yield any results, but either or, it's still very impressive. The main attraction, of course, is the giant, I guess, dragon? I'll just be calling it that. Which just looks so good, especially the details on the head. But I would be lying if I didn't say that everything else is great as well. I mean, they built an entire castle. Even the hot air balloons, they're definitely the best I've seen in Zeepkist yet. All around, this level is just cool. I love the sense of scale with the mountains and the castle nestled within them, as well as the ice dragon freezing the environment around it. The cattails clustered around the lake are super cute, and I really appreciate the trees. There is no tree spam, and yet it still works to fill out the space. I think it's safe to say this is a builder who knows what they're doing. But this level is not without some faults, so get ready for some nitpicking. The ice tube section is a little unintuitive. The natural oscillation always gave me a bad exit, so you either have to stop your oscillation or force an earlier one. This isn't really a problem, but it does feel a little off compared to the smoothness of the rest of the level. Further along, this quarter pipe and tunnel is a little hard to see. I think it could have used something to show its curve a little better. A set of lines following the turn would be an option. Again, not really a problem, but I'm trying. Something that you may consider a real problem though is the finish and risky finish. Honestly, I didn't even realize it was a finish when I first got here, and got pretty confused when the road just disappeared. The risky finish, being in this hot air balloon, isn't really represented by anything but itself, so some people with low opacity force fields can totally miss it. As well as that, somehow this happened. I guess if you don't arms up, and nothing tells you to, you can crash and miss the risky entirely. Style points for the launch and flip over I guess, but it felt pretty bad. Well, that's all the nitpicking I could muster. This level is great, and I do need to mention how much I love the arrow design. It's totally believable it's an emblem, flag, or anything else that would fit in this environment. I love hiding guides like that make sense within the world. Overall, this is a very cool track. The decoration is just mind-blowing to me, and the gameplay entwined within it is all super smooth and enjoyable. Despite the very minor issues I had, this deserves to be played. The effort put in is just astounding, and I'm very excited to see what DeeDee comes up with next. It would be super cool to see this expanded into its own universe or something, but that just may be too much work. And thank you for watching this episode of Zeepkist Map Reviews. If you want your Zeepkist maps to be reviewed in a future video, join the Discord linked in the description below. It's the only way we take submissions. Plus, if you opt in, you'll be notified every time a new episode is published. We only make these every 2 weeks, so they can be easy to miss. Now get out there and make some Zeepkist maps.